So I started in May 2001, finished December 2013. But I think what was the amazing thing about the job was no 2 days were the same. You could walk through those gates, and every day I did that. I was never with a sense of entitlement. It was always a sense of oh my golly, how fortunate and lucky am I? And every day would be different. Whether it was dealing with the media, whether it was going on a royal engagement, seeing an investiture, or just being in the office and meeting different people. So I think that was, it was an ordinary person, me, doing an extraordinary job. So as I said, I counted my blessings every day.
And sharing the office with the corgis as well.
I tell you, Kate, when those corgis, you'd see them coming down the corridor, and I'm a huge dog lover, but when I saw those corgis, I would shoot into the nearby office and hide because
Why
they
is
were
that?
pretty ferocious. They were pretty ferocious. I remember actually, the Queen hosted an afternoon tea party for the All Blacks rugby team from New Zealand. So these great big, sort of 6'5", 6'6", huge guys. Jonah Loma was one of them. And when the Queen and the corgis came in, the Queen often used to use corgis to sort of break the ice and put people at their ease. And these huge rugby players were sort of all putting their backs against the wall in terror. It was hilarious.
Gosh, the things you must have seen in your job. I mean, how do you kind of sum up that period of your life? Because I mean, every day there would have been somebody, some extraordinary VIP in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, or somebody you'd be liaising with, whether it's from kind of President of the United States of America through to, somebody who's been given the honor of going in to see the Queen, who's incredibly nervous beforehand.
You're absolutely right. I've got so many stories, probably too many to say, but I remember from the sublime to the ridiculous, Kate Winslet getting her award from the Queen at an investiture. And she was standing around with her then boyfriend, now husband, and so no one was talking to her. So I went up and said, would you like a glass of champagne? We're sort of hosting a little party in the Aquarius room. She said, oh, that's so kind. So she and her husband went in for a glass, and then I gave them a tour of the palace. And I thought, wow, this is Kate Winslet. This is really cool. So it was fantastic for me.
There was a great moment from that investiture, actually. I remember that Kate Winslet came and people sort of said after, what did the Queen say when you got your honour? And she said, she asked me all about my roles and things like that. She said, oh, I'm also a mum. And the Queen, I think, replied, that's the hardest job of all, or something like that. And I think that was those sort of anecdotes and those little snippets that we sometimes get that people share from their moments with the late Queen were quite revealing, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you feel that you've got a personal bit of information from her as well. So here it is, our monarch, our head of state, but she was a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and a great grandmother, which, we can all relate to. But she
Absolutely.
had, just going back to people you meet. Yeah, again, I remember, it just shows her kindness. She was hosting President Obama for a state visit, an incoming state visit. And traditionally, there's a sort of the formal arrival ceremony at Horse Guards Parade with all with the troops and the horse-drawn carriages. And then there's an official lunch, but just but sort of the team, so the home team, so the Queen's senior staff, other members of the royal family, and the visiting team with the principal. So we were sort of standing at the pre-lunch reception, and I was chatting to another member of the household. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw the Queen walk towards us with President Obama. And I thought, I wonder who the Queen's coming to introduce him to. And she was getting closer and closer. And she stopped at me. And she said, Mr. President, this is my press secretary. And all I could think of is like a think bubble in my head. I was like, oh my God, it's the President of the United States. And he said, ma'am, it's lovely to see you. Then the Queen said to him, yes, my press secretary is married to a naval officer. And he said, oh, tell your husband he's doing an amazing job. And I go, oh my God, the president is saying my husband's doing a great job. And it's one of those real sort of pinch me moments. The Queen didn't have to do that. She didn't have to introduce him to me, but she did as a huge act of generosity and kindness.
That's so lovely. I think remember I remember her sort of very skillfully kind of manipulating the room in a way, just sort of going around being introduced to people. But there's all these kind of sort of stories about how she had these signals to her aides that, you know, if she was getting bored of somebody, she'd move the handbag from one hand to the other. I mean, how true are those stories?
I've never seen, to be honest, Kat, I've never seen her do that. But when I mean, she's almost got an inner time clock. And she knew when she had to move on because, you know, if you're going to have a reception with 500 people, you can't meet all of them, but also you want to sort of sprinkle that bit of stardust to as many people as you can. So sort of aquaries were very skillful at seeing where the next group of people were for the Queen to meet. So it was all, you know, it's like it used to go like clockwork. It really did. And the Queen would just say, well, it's very, very nice to meet you and thank you so much for coming. And then she'd move on to the next group.
The Queen had seen it all, even by the time that, you know, you got to the palace. She'd seen negative press, positive press. Did she have a kind of sanguine attitude towards it? Was she quite, you know, how was she when you took things to her? Did you have those awful kind of, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to go in and see the boss with this awful headline and make her aware of something that was happening, or perhaps with someone else, another member of the family? How did you have those conversations? And
well, the Queen had all the newspapers brought to her every day, so which she would read. I mean, she was vociferous in getting her knowledge and information. So that's how she found out. But if there was a brewing issue, you know, we would put a note up. If it was very urgent, we would ask to see her. But yes, sanguine, and also, yes, she probably has seen it all. Yeah, and you come into the royal household as a newbie, and you're like Tigger on speed, really. You know, you're all very, very excited, and you put a note up to the Queen, thinking that, you know, you've got to come up with this great idea. You've had a light bulb moment. And you probably get a note down saying, yes, thank you, Ailsa. We tried that in 1972 and it didn't work. And you think, yeah, absolutely.
What would you remember what that was that you were asking?
No, I don't. I've crushed it out of my memory, Kate. You know, it's just that you think actually she won't do. And she said, yes, let's take a punt on it. And I remember we were rebuilding the website. And our fantastic web editor, Emma Goody, came up with the idea of doing a sort of a 3D virtual tour of the palace to give a sort of a taster, a curtain lifter for the summer opening, just to encourage more people to book tickets. I mean, yeah, great idea, really innovative. Sadly, not my idea. It was Emma, so she gets all the credit. But there were a few senior members of the household, I won't name who thought this was a ghastly idea, and it took away the magic, and it was too modern, just too awful. So anyway, I put a note up to the Queen suggesting this, and she said, yeah, absolutely, go for it.
Brilliant.
In slightly more regal terms, but yes, it was approved.
You are in the very unique position of having the late Queen as your boss. What were the kind of life lessons or career advice you took away from that time at the palace?
Don't make up when you're not sure of your ground. Be very sure of your ground.
Right.
You're going to, because she would see through any I can't swear, can I? Any rubbish that you might spin.
So, shrewd. She was shrewd. Yeah.
She was. She recognized someone who was, you know. Also, she didn't like people who put other people down. You know, she recognized she didn't like conceited people. You know, she
didn't like people who sort of showed off. Because I remember being with her. Yeah. You sort of kindly introduced me at one event, and there were lots of people saying, "Oh well, I'm this and I'm that," and she sort of seemed to find that all quite boring. People kind of showing off about their status absolutely. And thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember not showing up, but just an amusing aside story, which so forgive me if I've told you this before, but the Queen was going to a Privy Council meeting in the palace, made up of senior cabinet ministers, and she walked in the door into the room, and one of the ministers' mobile telephones went off, started ringing, and quick as a flash, the Queen said, "You better get that because it might be someone important."
I love those kind of subtle kind of put downs. That's brilliant.
I know, and it just honestly, she was very very, very funny.